we're going to be working on what I call fundamental and powerful concepts. They're not just important concepts in your course or your subject matter or your class. They're not just important concepts, they're fundamental and powerful. They're the kinds of concepts which allow students to think through a great deal of the subject matter. So they're kind of at the root of learning to understand the subject matter. So I want to show you some of the problems we deal with students, or some of the problems students have. So one problem is that students tend to see what we teach them as a bunch of details. Detail after detail after detail after detail. Look at the notes they take sometimes and the way they assemble those notes. They see classes in terms of details. Or I could ask you, if you don't teach history, what's your concept of history? Here's the concept of history most people have. It's dates, it's kings, it's emperors, it's battles, it's revolutions, detail after detail after detail. That is not the way historians see history, and it's not the way they teach history. But even after teaching history as the movement of peoples and how power gets to, I'm not going to elaborate about history, but even if you're teaching them that, students can still easily come away with the idea that history is about details. So that's true for most of our courses. So I want to share with you something about it. Here are the key concepts in a single chapter of a sociology textbook. You can see it enough here. I want you to look at these. Culture, non-material culture, material culture, culture shock, symbols, language, cultural transmission, Sapir-Whorf thesis, values, norms, folkways, social control, and so forth. This is one chapter out of 17 chapters, and you're a student in this course. I want you to notice there is no rhyme or reason to these concepts, right? They're listed in the order in which they occur in the chapter. That's how they're ordered. That is, what's the relationship between culture shock and cultural lag? I don't know. What's the relationship between culture shock and sociobiology? Who can tell? That is, this is not designed in any way to foster connection. Teachers are the ones who foster connection, but the students then take notes on that and forget very much. So, can you pick out the most fundamental and powerful concepts from this list? I'm guessing you could, but it would take you a while, right? Clearly, culture is one. That happens to be the title of this chapter. But is cultural transmission fundamental and powerful? Maybe values and norms are, right? Maybe. Is technology? Probably not central. It's probably not fundamental, nor high culture or popular culture or subculture or multiculturalism or Eurocentrism or Afrocentrism, no Asiacentrism. I mean, it's just picked out. The reason for that is that authors of textbooks have to include as much as possible so as to appeal to a wide range of teachers who want to emphasize different things. Okay, so I want you to get the feeling this is problematic for students. When faced with this, what am I going to do? This is one chapter out of 17. What am I going to do? How am I going to understand them? Uh, so that's that one. Okay, I'm going to say something about fundamental and powerful concepts. A fundamental and powerful concept is the kind of concept which, if I could get my students to understand it deeply, they could use that concept to figure out, to understand much of the rest of the course. So a fundamental and powerful concept is the kind of concept which, if I could get my students to understand it deeply, they could use that concept to think through a great deal of the rest of the course, maybe all of the rest of the course. So I want to give you a few examples of that. So what are some fundamental and powerful concepts in biology? Well, many people might do it different ways, but here's the ones I would choose. I would choose cell and homeostasis. If I could get my students to have a good grasp, strong, deep grasp of those two concepts, cell and homeostasis, they could use those two concepts to understand what? Almost everything. They could use it to understand digestion, respiration, reproduction. They could use it to understand humans. They could use it to understand animals. They could use it to understand plants. That is, if they had a good grasp of cell and homeostasis, they could use those concepts to understand a great deal of biology in all kinds of realms. Let me contrast it with an important biological concept, but not a fundamental and powerful one. It's the concept of mitochondria. Mitochondria are very important in the cell. They're the energy of our cell. But if you've got a really good grasp of mitochondria, it does not allow you to think through all kinds of things. It's an important concept, but it's not fundamental and powerful the way cell is. Okay? So I'm hoping you get a feel for how cell is a fundamental and powerful concept in biology. Now, let me show you a biology textbook with a chapter. Chapter 4 is the chapter on the cell. I want you to look at this. This is the chapter on the cell, and here are the what they call key terms. How many of them are there? 25? I think the author of this book lost the meaning of the word key, is in key terms, right? But look at these. Cell junction, central vacuole, chloroplast. Can't read them all. Cisternal space, cytoplasm, cytoskeleton, endomembranes. I'm hoping if you put yourself in the mind of a student in this course, undergraduate biology course, you're just going to feel, well, maybe despair is too strong a word. But you get the feeling of how discouraging this is? Now, students have evolved a way of studying for this. You do the equivalent of flashcards, and you get quizzed on them, and your teacher is going to ask you something of this list. But notice, they're not fundamental and powerful concepts at all. In fact, in the chapter on the cell is not even one of the key terms listed, just the parts of the cell. So let me show you another example of a fundamental and powerful concept, or what isn't. Here's a way people frequently teach writing. It's called the six-trait writing process. And it's nice. You have the content, that's the thing that you're trying to say, how you organize your writing, the voice you use, the word choice, sentence fluency, and conventions. Conventions mean all kinds of things, but it's certain kind of writing you can't use certain words like ain't. It's a convention. Okay. I want you to notice, let me show you fundamental and powerful concepts. They overlap with what Paul said. Here are fundamental and powerful concepts in writing. There are three of them. As far as I can tell, there are just three. There's the content, communication, and audience. So if I'm going to write something to you about anything in the world, I have to think through in terms of what am I trying to say? That's the content. How can I best say it? And to whom am I saying it? Right? Content, communication, and audience. Those are fundamental and powerful concepts. Contrast them now with the six-trait writing process. Content, the top one, fundamental and powerful concept. Organization might be one, but voice isn't, right? Paul, when you teach science communication, you focus on voice, the tone in which they're writing their. No, of course not. I bet you don't focus on word choice either, or sentence fluency, or conventions. So notice, not only are those only for subjects that you're writing about, but sentence. It's supposed to have a good understanding of sentence fluency. That does not allow me to think through how to write a paper. It's a detail in how to write a paper, an important detail, but not fundamental and powerful. Let me give you a couple of other examples. So I gave a workshop on fundamental and powerful concepts. We have only an hour. When I do this in person, it takes 3-4 hours. And a guy went through it. He taught physics. He went through it twice. And he said afterwards, couple of years later, I ran into him that he changed his entire way of teaching physics. Okay. What he does now is he says to his class, I'm going to spend 10 weeks on only three concepts: force, mass, and energy. You're going to learn those inside and out. And after that, for the remaining 6 weeks of our semester, I'm going to ask you to apply those three concepts to every topic that we address. Notice, they now have an inroad to acoustics. They have an inroad into virtually everything in physics on the basis of those three. Um, and so here's me on history. But remember, I'm not a historian. So suppose you teach United States history, or history of India, or history of your country. Suppose you teach one of those, and somehow or other you get roped into teaching ancient Egyptian history, and you don't know ancient Egyptian history. I want you to get the feeling you do not start from zero. You do know how to teach ancient Egyptian history. You just have to read about it, but you know how to teach history. You know what historical thinking is. You know what it's like to think through something historically. Now, I would say if I want to understand ancient Egyptian history, I'm going to try to think in terms of here are two of the concepts I come up with. But don't pick on them because again, I'm not in history. It would be power. Where is the power in this civilization or in this country? Where is the power? And then a second one is whose interests are at stake? Who has a stake in this country? And how does that influence what happens? Those would be my two. Notice battles are not there, dates are not there, kings and emperors are not there. But if I have a good concept of, if I have a good understanding of how power works in a society and a good understanding of how different stakeholders affect the way history goes, I can now think through emperors. I can think through American presidents. I can think through British monarchs. I can think through the Mughals in India. I can think through the emperors in Japan. I can think through famous battles. I now have a way of going about it, of understanding history. What I'd be doing is thinking historically. And that's different from mastering details. So let me look at chat.